Have you ever wondered, what if Jesus truly left behind his DNA on a piece of cloth? The Shroud of Turin, believed to have covered his body after the crucifixion, has sparked fierce debates between science and theology for over 600 years. But recently, a shocking DNA decoding has uncovered something no one expected. Genetic traces from multiple ethnicities, distant lands, and possibly from a man who doesn't belong to any known era. Is this the ultimate proof of the resurrection, or a conspiracy hidden for centuries? Join A&O Productions as we unveil the mystery of the DNA of the crucified one. It's just a piece of cloth, or is it? Tucked away in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, lies a relic that has baffled scientists, theologians, and skeptics for centuries: the Shroud of Turin. Measuring about 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide, this ancient linen bears the faint yet haunting imprint of a crucified man. Some say it's nothing more than an ingenious medieval forgery. Others believe it is the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ. The story of the shroud begins in the mists of medieval Europe, first appearing in historical records in the 14th century in France. But whispers of its existence go back even further, to the legendary image of Edessa, a mysterious cloth said to bear the face of Christ, hidden for centuries in the East. Could the Shroud of Turin and the image of Edessa be one and the same? By the time the cloth surfaced in Lille, France, around the year 1354, it had already sparked controversy. Church officials were divided. Some venerated it, others denounced it as a fake. In 1389, a bishop even declared it a hoax. But the image persisted, unfading, unexplainable, and unsettling. What makes this cloth so enigmatic? It's not just the image, it's how the image was formed. Unlike paint, dye, or scorch marks, the image on the shroud has no clear explanation. Modern imaging techniques have revealed that it holds 3D information, something no artist of the medieval period could have achieved. No brushstrokes, no pigment, just a shadow-like figure that appears more clearly in photographic negative than to the naked eye. Then comes the most provocative claim. This is the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. But is that really possible? Carbon dating conducted in 1988 seemed to deliver the final verdict. The cloth dated between 1260 and 1390, well after the time of Christ. Case closed? Not quite. Critics of the test pointed out contamination, fire damage, and repairs that may have skewed the results. Later research suggested the tested sample might not have been part of the original cloth at all. What's more, forensic analyses of the wounds on the image match biblical accounts of Roman crucifixion, wrist piercings, scourge marks, and a crown of thorns. Coincidence? Artistic genius? Or something else? Centuries later, the shroud still refuses to give a straight answer. It lies silent, inviting us not to solve a puzzle, but to enter a mystery. And what if this mystery contains a fingerprint from eternity? What happens when modern science dares to touch the relic of Christ? For centuries, the Shroud of Turin was examined through the lens of history, theology, and art. But in the last few decades, a new kind of investigation has emerged, one powered by microscopes, genome sequencing, and forensic analysis. Scientists began to ask, if this cloth once wrapped the crucified body of Jesus, would it still hold biological traces? Could DNA survive 2,000 years? In the early 2000s, a team of researchers carefully collected dust particles and microscopic biological material from the surface of the linen, without damaging the relic. Under strict protocols, they extracted samples near the facial and side areas of the image. The goal was clear: to identify any residual human DNA. What they found, however, shook even the most skeptical minds. Fragments of mitochondrial DNA passed down through the maternal line were detected on the cloth. But it wasn't just the presence of human DNA that raised eyebrows, it was its diversity. The genetic sequences matched people of Mediterranean origin, which might seem reasonable, but they also included DNA markers from individuals linked to Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, the Indian subcontinent, and even Far East Asia. How could this be? According to historical consensus, Jesus was a Jewish man from 1st century Judea. The shroud, if authentic, would have been used only briefly, wrapped around his body for less than 48 hours before the resurrection. So how does a relic so localized in time and space come to contain genetic markers from such a broad range of ethnicities and geographies? Some argue that the shroud was exposed to thousands of pilgrims over the centuries, each potentially contaminating it with their own DNA. Others believe the cloth's journey, possibly from Jerusalem to Edessa to Constantinople, and finally to France and Italy, exposed it to people from multiple continents. Yet even this explanation fails to fully account for the highly preserved and varied mitochondrial DNA that appears to be deeply embedded in the threads themselves, not just surface contamination. This mystery has led some to speculate. Are we simply reading the effects of human devotion across centuries? Or is the DNA telling a story that transcends linear time? Could the man of the shroud carry a genetic imprint that points beyond history, perhaps toward a universal humanity or something even more divine? Whether miracle or misinterpretation, the DNA on the shroud remains one of the most fascinating riddles of modern biblical science, and the debate is far from over. What if the blood found on the Shroud of Turin didn't just speak of a man from the past, but of someone beyond time itself? As researchers began decoding the biological material left on the linen, they were stunned. While the initial results had already revealed a startling mix of ethnic origins, from Middle Eastern to European, and even Far Eastern, another pattern began to emerge, one that defied conventional science. The mitochondrial DNA, the kind passed down exclusively from mothers, showed highly unusual variations. Not only were there haplogroups present that are rarely, if ever seen together in a single individual, but some markers didn't seem to correspond to any known population group at all. Geneticists were left scratching their heads. Where exactly did this person come from? Some speculated that the anomalies were due to contamination over centuries. Pilgrims from different regions touching the cloth in veneration. But others countered. The patterns were too embedded, too consistent, and too localized to be purely external. In short, the DNA appeared to come from the person wrapped inside the cloth, not just the thousands who touched it. But how could one man carry such a genetic mosaic? One hypothesis emerged, one that sounded more like something out of a theological thriller than a scientific journal. Could the DNA profile be a kind of genetic echo of all humanity? A singular fingerprint embedded in flesh that bore witness to every tribe, every nation, a universal man. To believers, it resonated deeply. The Apostle Paul wrote of Jesus as the second Adam, the one who recapitulates all of humanity within himself. Could this mysterious genetic signature be a biological confirmation of that theological claim? But here's where things got even stranger. Some markers found in the analysis couldn't be matched with any known human lineage, not ancient, not modern. They were simply unclassified. The term non-human began circulating in fringe discussions, though mainstream science was more cautious, preferring terms like unidentified or anomalous sequences. Still, the implications were staggering. If even a fragment of this data held up, we were looking at something unprecedented, a body that bore the genetic traces of everywhere and nowhere. Some dismissed it all as pseudoscience. Others called it divine irony, that in our age of DNA obsession, we might stumble upon a piece of evidence that was never meant to be unlocked by science alone. And yet, the questions remain. Could the body wrapped in the Shroud of Turin truly defy the boundaries of ethnicity, geography, even time? Or have we been given a cosmic clue, encoded in linen, written in blood, that the one who died was not just from one people, but for all? The Shroud of Turin, with its mysterious DNA evidence, brings us face to face with a profound theological question. What does the resurrection of Jesus mean in relation to the human body? In Christianity, the resurrection of Christ is not merely a spiritual event, but a physical one, where Jesus, in his glorified body, rose from the dead, never to die again. This central tenet of faith carries deep theological implications, especially when we think about the future resurrection of the dead. Theologically, the resurrection body is described as being both the same and yet completely transformed. According to 1 Corinthians 15:42-44, what is sown is perishable, what is raised is imperishable. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. This passage speaks to the profound mystery of the transformation that occurs between death and resurrection. Christ's body, after his resurrection, bore the scars of his passion, evidence of his suffering. Yet it was no longer bound by the limitations of space and time. His glorified body could walk through walls, appear and disappear at will, and was immortal. What does this mean for the Shroud of Turin and the potential DNA evidence it holds? If the shroud is indeed the authentic burial cloth of Jesus, it suggests that his body underwent a miraculous transformation that transcended the normal laws of nature. The apparent presence of multiple DNA strands on the cloth, representing different ethnic groups, could point to a body that existed beyond the constraints of a single human identity or time period. Some theologians argue that this is a reflection of the eternal nature of Christ's glorified body, one that transcends all boundaries of race, geography, and time. This body, after being raised, was not a mere resuscitation of life, but a transformation into something far greater, imperishable, incorruptible, and powerful. For Christians, this is the hope of the resurrection, that one day, just as Christ rose in a glorified body, so too will believers be raised with new, perfected bodies. The theological implications of the Shroud of Turin in this context are profound. It raises questions about the nature of the resurrection and whether science can ever truly explain the miraculous transformation that occurs when the body is raised to eternal life. For centuries, the Catholic Church has refrained from making an official declaration regarding the Shroud of Turin. The shroud, which many believe to be the burial cloth of Christ, remains a subject of debate among theologians, scientists, and historians. While the Church has not yet confirmed it as a definitive religious relic, it has not outright dismissed the possibility of its significance. Instead, the Church has maintained an open approach, allowing for ongoing research and discussions about the shroud's authenticity. Popes throughout history, such as Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI, have expressed deep respect for the shroud. In 1998, Pope John Paul II had stated that the shroud is a symbol of human suffering and divine love. He urged the faithful to approach the shroud with reverence, seeing in it not just a relic, but a reminder of the sacrifice of Christ. His words emphasized the emotional and spiritual significance of the shroud, rather than focusing solely on its material authenticity. Pope Benedict XVI, in his pontificate, also referred to the shroud in a similar light. He acknowledged its profound impact on the Christian faith and its role as a symbol of Christ's passion. While he did not pronounce it to be the actual burial cloth of Jesus, Benedict XVI affirmed that it serves as a powerful symbol of Christ's suffering and resurrection. His words reinforce the idea that the shroud, regardless of its origins, remains a powerful spiritual symbol for millions of Christians around the world. Although the Vatican has not made an official decision regarding the shroud's authenticity, it has supported scientific research aimed at uncovering its origins. The Church has allowed scholars and scientists to study the shroud and even assisted in some of the research initiatives, while ensuring that such studies remain respectful of the religious and theological dimensions of the artifact. The Church recognizes that the shroud can be seen as a mystery, one that invites people into a deeper contemplation of the passion of Christ. It serves as a symbol of suffering, but also of hope and resurrection. The Church's teachings emphasize that the shroud, while not a definitive proof of the resurrection, still points to the central message of Christianity, that through suffering comes redemption, and through death comes eternal life. Despite the lack of an official statement from the Church regarding the shroud's origins, it has maintained that the shroud remains a symbol of pain and hope for Christians everywhere. For many believers, the shroud is an invitation to reflect on Christ's ultimate sacrifice, a tangible reminder of the suffering he endured for humanity's salvation. It stands as a testament to his love, a love that transcends time and space, and a love that is accessible to all who seek it. In conclusion, while the Shroud of Turin remains a subject of scientific and theological debate, it continues to inspire deep reverence within the Catholic Church. Its mystery invites believers to engage in a deeper dialogue between faith and science, encouraging them to explore the depths of Christ's passion and the mystery of his resurrection. The shroud, though not officially declared a relic by the Church, remains an enduring symbol of Christ's suffering, love, and the hope of eternal life. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has stood at the crossroads of skepticism and faith. Was it the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, or a medieval fabrication? While many believers regard it as a tangible link to the Passion, critics suggest it might be a stunning work of pious deception. The controversy exploded in 1988 when radiocarbon dating tests conducted independently in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona concluded that the linen originated between 1260 and 1390 AD. The verdict seemed clear. The shroud was a medieval artifact. Headlines declared the mystery solved, but not everyone accepted that conclusion. Soon after, scientists and scholars began pointing out serious flaws in the testing process. The sample cut for dating was taken from a corner known to have been repaired, possibly contaminated with newer fibers. Furthermore, the presence of a bioplastic bacterial layer on the linen, discovered later, may have skewed the dating results significantly. Newer analysis, including chemical and textile studies, have suggested that the shroud's weave is more consistent with first-century Middle Eastern cloth than with medieval European linen. Some researchers even argue that the radiocarbon tests should be considered inconclusive at best. Then comes the biggest twist, the image itself. To this day, no artist or scientist has been able to fully replicate the unique characteristics of the shroud's image. It is not painted, drawn, or stained. The coloration affects only the topmost fibers of the cloth, less than 1/5 of a human hair in depth. It lacks pigment, brush strokes, and any directional application. Even more mysterious, the image appears in photographic negative. When first photographed in 1898, its reversed image revealed stunning anatomical details, as if the cloth had recorded a real human form through some unknown burst of energy. So if it's not a forgery, what is it? Some suggest it is a medieval miracle. Others claim it's the product of a natural process we don't yet understand. But an increasing number of researchers, both secular and Christian, have begun to entertain the possibility that the image was caused by something supernatural. Perhaps even the moment of resurrection itself. Is the shroud a hoax crafted by a genius centuries ahead of his time? A sacred relic bearing witness to the central mystery of Christian faith? or something in between, a symbol meant to provoke reflection rather than offer proof. Whatever its origin, the shroud refuses to be forgotten. It invites every generation to wrestle with the same question: what if it's real? How for centuries, the Shroud of Turin has stood at the crossroads between faith and reason. To some, it is a silent witness to the greatest miracle in history, the resurrection. To others, it is merely an artifact steeped in centuries of devotion, controversy, and mystery. But whether viewed through a microscope or contemplated in prayer, the shroud forces a unique and unavoidable confrontation. Can science and faith ever speak the same language? Let's start with what science has uncovered. The image on the shroud is not painted, drawn, or stained in any traditional way. It resides only on the outermost fibers of the linen, so shallow it barely penetrates beyond a few microns. No pigment, no brush strokes, no known medieval technique accounts for how this ghostly image was formed. And yet, science remains cautious. Carbon dating from 1988 suggested a medieval origin, but subsequent studies exposed contamination, fire damage, and questionable sampling methods, leaving the door ajar for deeper inquiry. Then there's the DNA. As we've seen, the biological material on the cloth includes traces from individuals of Middle Eastern, European, and even Far Eastern origin. Critics argue this reflects centuries of contact by pilgrims. Believers see something else: a cloth that traveled, protected, and was venerated across continents. A silent journey, echoing the universality of the gospel itself. But the dialogue deepens when theology enters the scene. The Church has never formally declared the shroud as authentic. It has not proclaimed it a dogma of faith. Yet popes have knelt before it, calling it a mirror of the gospel, an icon of suffering, and a sign of hope. Why such reverence for something so controversial? Because perhaps its mystery is the message. In an age where faith is often dismissed as irrational, and science is wielded like a scalpel to dissect mystery, the shroud whispers a challenge to both camps. It says, "There are things not yet fully explained, and perhaps never meant to be." It reminds the believer that faith must seek understanding, not blind belief, but a faith that dares to ask questions. It reminds the scientist that not all truths fit neatly into the lab. This dialogue isn't a battle. It's a pilgrimage, a journey where believers and skeptics alike walk together, not to demolish one another's views, but to refine them. The shroud doesn't scream answers. It invites deeper reflection. Maybe that's why it remains so enduring. Not because it proves the resurrection, but because it refuses to be silenced by simple conclusions. In the end, the Shroud of Turin may never yield all its secrets, but perhaps that is its purpose. Like the tomb that was found empty, it leaves us with more questions than answers, but questions that stir the soul, stretch the mind, and beckon us to something greater. So whether you stand in a cathedral or a laboratory, in prayer or in data, the challenge is the same: to stay open. Open to wonder, open to truth, and open to the possibility that the greatest mysteries of all may lie precisely at the place where faith and science meet. Do you believe DNA can whisper the story of the resurrection, or could it all be a masterful illusion of history? The shroud still holds its secrets, but one thing is certain: this is not the end. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this video if the mystery moved you. Subscribe to A&O Productions because many truths are still hidden in plain sight.